we're going to begin the discussion today by having a conversation, just kind of setting the table and asking about whether startups can really succeed from day one and whether they should even be trying. I'm joined on stage by Julia Neznanova, who's the director of Friends of eBay, Sean Leow, the director of International for Kickstarter, Tereza Nemessanyi, who's an entrepreneur in residence for Microsoft, and Matt Perlman, who's a principal with Fenway Summer Ventures. And so I'm really excited because there's some pretty unique perspectives here today. All four of you are engaged in communities who are of startups who are going global, but you're also entrepreneurs yourselves, and several of you have founded startups over the course of your careers. And so I hope that the advice that you can give today will be informed not only by your current roles, but also by your previous experience innovating and developing new companies. So Julia, I was going to start with you, if that's all right. You have the perspective now from Friends of eBay, but also from a history of being an entrepreneur. And so I wonder if you could kind of help set the table for us based on your experience about whether you think startups can succeed globally and whether they should try. Let me give you the microphone. Pass that down. Now, we only have one microphone today, and so we're just going to be kind of communal.
We're going to share.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Jake. Yes, I'm really excited about this event, mainly because I am actually an international entrepreneur, and for me, New York is a place where I really could take my startups and take them global. So I've launched startups in 3 countries now, and it kind of came full circle for me because my previous startup that I co-founded 3.5 years ago was called Labs, and it was a global content and community platform for software engineers, and we were actually going global from day one. And then a year later, we got to participate in the Friends of eBay program, which I didn't know anything about back then. And I saw this amazing synergy between the corporations and what they can do to give startups to scale, and at the same time, the startups that are struggling every day, starving, and you're lost every single day in a startup, and you think that you're failing. So when you end up being in an ecosystem, and Tereza is going to confirm this, I think, that is really supportive and that helps you scale and accelerate, it's crucial for you. So that's why when I was invited to become director for Friends of eBay, I wanted to make it even better and bigger and really figure out how to have this amazing partnership between the professionals inside a pretty innovative corporation and all the startup founders.
Thank you, Julia. Tereza, I was going to turn to you next because you're kind of in a similar boat as Julia. You've got a history of being an entrepreneur, but now you have this platform at Microsoft. And so could you talk maybe a little bit about the role that Microsoft plays in helping startups succeed, but feel free to talk about your experience as well.
Of course, thank you. And it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for including me. Also in common with Julia is a last name that starts with an N that is impossible to pronounce, and it's definitely not from here. I'm a kid of immigrants, so kind of a classic New York and entrepreneur, story, and actually started my startup career in the Paleolithic era, 1992, where I actually took my backpack and went back to the Czech Republic, or what was then Czechoslovakia, and we launched the first commercial television network in Eastern Europe. So we're actually part of rebuilding that. So it was in an international context completely that my entrepreneurial career began. Fast forward a really long time. In my current role with Microsoft, I lead what we do with startups in New York, and I get a lot of our inbound, our high-level inbound deal flow across the entire East Coast. It's a very exciting time for Microsoft right now. We're absolutely, the company is absolutely kind of reinventing itself. And our mission as a company is to help every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And in our work with startups, it is with that lens as well. So some of it is around technology and giving, a lot of free stuff, or and helping startups work through their products. think about how they can be most effective. And largely it is within a global context, because sort of from day one you're competing globally often, right? And then also we think about, as a company that is in every country and reaches and touches billions of people, are there ways that we can support new startups to access this, so to help them get global fast? Now, it's interesting being here in New York, because I see, I certainly work with startups that are born in New York and then are looking to kind of stretch out. But we also are, of course, like the welcome wagon, for so many excellent startups from overseas who seek to, kind of get a toehold and enter the US market. And then the other thing I'd say is so many teams also start global, because they're just, in my last startup, I had a developer in Ukraine who was awesome. I mean, we were all over the place from day one. We were actually a virtual team. Totally typical. So those are just some patterns that I see that hopefully tee up the conversation. But
Thank you very much. That's one of the things that comes up often is these decentralized teams now. You don't need to be in a particular place. You don't necessarily have a headquarters. So Matt, money is clearly important to startups, and one of the things that we hear often is access to financing kind of limits global growth. So, I wonder if you can talk from your perspective, from your portfolio, from the community that you see about the importance of going global. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely, and thanks to everybody for having me today. So I work for a venture capital firm, an investment firm called Fenway Summer. We're based in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and we have absolutely nothing to do with Boston or the Red Sox, which I find myself having to explain in every single meeting, and I think it's probably cost me business here in New York. But we were founded a few years ago by a gentleman named Raj Date, who was immediately prior was the deputy director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which some of you may know is the main consumer finance regulatory watchdog here in the U.S., set up by Dodd-Frank legislation. And before that, he was a longtime advisor, investment banker, and senior executive at financial services companies. So the idea was to bring together a team that has deep domain expertise in financial services, but also this kind of regulatory policy and compliance expertise. And that's really, in a nutshell, is the value proposition that we try to bring for the companies that we work with. I personally am based here in New York City. I like to say that I'm the head of the New York office, which is currently one person.
and Starbucks.
Right, exactly. We work, actually. And you can find me downtown in the financial district. But in terms of the New York market, clearly, the startup scene here is extremely vibrant. We've invested in a number of companies in the city, some of whom are serving the global capital markets, and actually some of whom are serving customers in the local market and delivering low-cost financial products to underserved consumers. When it comes to financial services, the themes that drive opportunity are, some of them are technological in nature, right? The advent of bringing financial services online, distributing them through mobile channels, and using distributed ledger technology for tracking transactions and verifying identities and so forth. And so that kind of thing is inherently global. But on the other hand, you have idiosyncrasies in local markets in terms of the structure of capital markets, in terms of demographics, and particularly in terms of financial regulation, which obviously bears heavily on our industry. And so there are some companies that we work with that frankly focus only on the United States. It's a big market, and there have been seismic changes here that create opportunities that are germane to the U.S. only. But we also have invested in companies that are active in multiple markets and have kind of inherently global missions. And so we try to help companies expand globally where it's appropriate, where the business opportunity justifies it, and do it thoughtfully in a way that's not going to run afoul of any kind of policy headwinds abroad. So happy to delve deeper into examples of that, and I think it's the kind of awareness of local trends on the ground in terms of policy, in terms of local partnerships, are true not just in financial services, but for startups more broadly.
Thanks, Matt. So Sean, Kickstarter is kind of uniquely positioned to help startups go global through its platform. We had a founder who had developed kind of a Keurig for brewing beer at home. It's Pico Brew out at a startup global event we did in Seattle. And his story was fascinating. It was an opportunity not only to test the market here, but also internationally. And so could you talk a little bit about how Kickstarter enables startups to go global over its platform?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I should start out by saying that Kickstarter is a New York City startup itself. We're over in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, 120 people there. So, so we are a startup ourselves, and we face a lot of the challenges that startups anywhere have, especially in my role, which is going to new markets. Right now, we're only open in 18 countries for creators to launch their projects. You can back from anywhere. So I'm going through that every day as part of my day-to-day work. But we have a lot of startups that launch on Kickstarter. For people who aren't familiar, our mission is to help people bring their creative projects to life. Obviously, there are famous startups like Oculus, Pebble Watch that have launched through Kickstarter, but we're just as happy when someone's able to launch a $2,000 project to fund a new album, or make pottery, or have a dance performance. That's kind of where the DNA of the company comes from. In terms of what we see on a global basis, roughly 40% of the creators that we're seeing now are coming from abroad. So they're trying to tap into the US market and the 11 million backers that we have. But the example that you were talking about, Pico Brew, is a great example of someone who's in the US and they want to tap into a particular market where people have a similar interest, in that case, craft beer. I don't know, I don't really break down geographically too much, because I think everybody is operating on a global scale, whether it's they have employees in different countries or they see the opportunity to grow outside of wherever their home base is.
Awesome, thank you. So I think the idea is I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions, but it would be really great if you all asked some or had some comments as well. And so start thinking about them now, so there's not that awkward silence when you say, are there any questions? So maybe just the first, to build on the last thing that you just said, how important is it to be global from day one? Should startups be thinking that way, and does it depend on the industry? Tereza, I don't know if maybe you want to...
Totally have opinions on that. I definitely have opinions on that. I mean, in my heart, I love global businesses, but some are just by their nature local. It could be because it's a multi-local solution of some kind, and you just have to think that way, and a certain size may be enough, okay? But the other thing is that every sector is different, and a number of them are regulated businesses. So I just talked to a company yesterday that has a healthcare solution, and they figured it out for the UK, but US regulations are completely different. Whether or not their solution is going to be able to achieve product market fit within the regulatory environment, that's a really important question for them to think through. So they've joined an accelerator to kind of do a 3-month sprint to figure it out. Does it make sense for them to figure out the US? Financial services would be another, obvious one. Anything that's around government contracting. So I think that they're pretty obvious, areas where you'd want to think about if the country of origin is as big as it, needs to be, and or what are elements of the business that can be at once extensible across lines, but still unique. Because if sometimes when you make something that's extensible, then it kind of dumbs down the secret sauce that was there to begin with.
Awesome. Does anyone else have a thought? Julie?
Yes, I think that right now, as Sean mentioned, when the borders are kind of collapse some of it in a good way. And I think that it's not a decision about going global or not going global from day one. It is more about what product are you building and what you should be focusing on and what is your focus. Because opposite to what Tereza is saying, without contradicting you, when it comes to projects that are built on open source or around the open source networks, you don't have a choice of not going global because it is a global network. Same with Kickstarter, right? Even though a lot of the products are physical products, for example, there was an amazing project that was just launched a few months ago, which is a safety ring that was started in Russia, and then they came to New York, and they got a few 100,000 maybe backers from all over the world, and it is a physical product, yet they launch on a platform like this, and it goes global immediately. Or the same thing, for instance, Friends of eBay had and has a startup called Green. One of the founders is going to be talking later, and this is a jewelry marketplace. And through someone like eBay, sorry for a call out, but with 162 million active buyers, they were able to go global from minute one, even though it seemed like a local business. So I think it's more about really understanding your market and your product from day one, and not being afraid to let the product run its way and go global even before you're ready to do so.
Matt or Sean, do you want to say?
Go for it.
Yeah, just to build on that point, I think what we see a lot on Kickstarter is someone will launch a project, they have no idea really where it will resonate. They obviously, you tell your mom and your grandma to back it, but it can grow from a local place, and you start seeing you have backers in London or Singapore or any kind of city or country that might be interested in innovation. And in that way, it can be, we see Kickstarter a bit as a tool for people to find out where like-minded folks are, where potential customers are.
So to answer the question directly, and maybe to like a little bit of a contrary view, I guess that my answer would be not necessarily. Should startups go global from day one or at all? We have backed or ourselves launched several consumer finance companies to take advantage of very specific conditions in the U.S., regulatory changes, and the withdrawal of traditional financial institutions from certain segments, subprime credit cards, certain areas of the mortgage market, student lending, online installment lending, and it's a big enough market, and it's really a unique set of circumstances where that position those companies to thrive here, and I think probably here only. And on the other hand, we've backed companies like Circle, which is a global peer-to-peer payments company that uses the Bitcoin blockchain to enable consumers to send each other payments instantaneously and frictionlessly in any currency anywhere in the world. So that is obviously an inherently global vision, and so if you're going to do that, you need to be laying the groundwork from day one in terms of getting the necessary regulatory approvals in the markets that you want to be active in, partnering with banks in markets where you need a commercial banking infrastructure to succeed. There are also situations where you can take a concept that has worked in the U.S. and port it to other markets, but you need to be careful there. I guess to return to student lending, which is an industry that's very important to our organization. Clearly, private student lending is quite prevalent here in the U.S. Historically, that hasn't been the case elsewhere in the world. In Europe, for instance, education finance has traditionally been largely covered by the government through grants or through government leverage. In recent years, that's changed as a result of a combination of fiscal austerity and increases in the cost of living, and so now students in Europe actually face significant funding gaps. And so we invested in a company called Future Finance, which is founded by an American guy, and which is designed to specifically deliver a specially tailored private student loan product in the UK and continental Europe. And so on the plus side, like there's a clear need for it, there's no meaningful competition. But on the other hand, it's a very different conversation with regulators over there who aren't used to seeing that product. The student lending has very different characteristics from other types of lending. Like you're lending to somebody who doesn't really have a history of income or current income, and so traditional affordability metrics don't necessarily apply. And so you need to be very thoughtful about proactively engaging regulators and policymakers, making sure that the concept really translates to the customer base that you're looking to serve.
Yeah. Thank you, man. So,
Can I actually add to that point, if you don't mind? Yeah, I just wanted to really elaborate on the example of Circle. What I see over the past years that is really an amazing trend is how a lot of startups even shift and change the policies or help change those policies and show some, according to them, according to what they're thinking, show some inefficiencies in how certain things are run. For example, like Circle can be a perfect example of the exchange policies that are being discussed right now, right? Or the same thing with someone obvious like Lyft. Like I was living in San Francisco 5 years ago, where it took me 30 minutes to get a cab, and it would cancel last minute. So changing, that approach and really pushing towards innovation, and then having the government adapt those policies and introducing even like new markets and new fields inside the country is a big thing, I think.
yeah. So I wanted to ask maybe just one more question quickly and see, one of the things that we like to do here today is emphasize the private and public sector resources that are available to help startups go global. And so I wanted to see if each of you could call out one or two resources, either private sector or government resources that would be valuable to startups looking to go global. And I was just going to give one. I think one overlooked resource are our embassies and consulates in countries around the world. There are folks from the State Department there, diplomats, but then there are also foreign commercial service officers who are on the ground and whose mission it is to understand the local marketplace and to help people Americans who call up who want to get a better sense for the local marketplaces and the services that are provided there by the U.S. government. So I would encourage you to look at that if you're looking to go into particular markets around the world. But who wants to go first?
So I'm gonna make a comment, which is, so a lot of what I do is in the cloud. Obviously, there's been a lot in the news about Microsoft and other cloud providers and regarding regulation and cross-border regulation, who owns the information. I'm not an expert in the area, but so much innovation is happening in the cloud, and the public trust of it is really paramount. I mean, when a business is born in the cloud, by definition, it is global. And so I think that a big reason why Microsoft has invested a lot in advocating is because so much future growth does depend on us all figuring it out. So that would be my response to that one.
Okay. Julia, or Matt or Sean?
Sure. Again, I'm not an expert in this, and actually, the next panel, or more of an interview with Julie Samuels, is going to cover some of that in detail. But for me, I guess I really saw how global corporations can really help startups in that and serve as support. So someone like Microsoft, someone like eBay, and there are a lot of other accelerators that are opening up by Capital One, by American Express, and really supporting the startups and providing the infrastructures where I see a lot of development.
Matt or Sean, do you want to have a recommendation?
Yeah, this is kind of maybe a contrarian resource that you can look for, but it's actually to seek out the people that are already doing what you're doing, quote, friend pedditors. And that's something that I do whenever I visit other countries, is look for the other crowdfunding platforms, reach out to them, because at the end of the day, if you're a very mission-driven company, which Kickstarter is, we're not trying to dominate the world or grow at some ridiculous pace. We're actually trying to help creative people bring their projects to life. So I've actually had a really welcoming response from companies that are doing the same thing as Kickstarter. I want to reach out to them, sharing best practices, sharing how things can be done to achieve the mission that multiple companies are trying to do at the same time.
Did you want to say?
Sure. I like friend competitors. I'm going to steal that. So I would just add, investors, somewhat self-servingly, but make sure you have the right ones and make sure that you use them, because when you are expanding internationally, it's very difficult to do alone, and a friendly introduction to a potential partner or local regulator can make a massive amount of difference.
Can I add one more?
Yeah.
Because actually I see someone in the audience who just triggered it. Universities,
Yeah, for sure.
can't forget. Some of the shout out, Sharon. Really critical, cutting edge technical work is happening in our universities, and it just may not be ready for market yet, but it needs to get to market. So, spending time going deep with academics and with students who are really pushing the cutting edge work, I think is absolutely critical, and they're just gems to be had, both in New York City as well as all cities around the world, which also, by the way, can often be very diverse places. So I don't overlook that.
That's a really good point. And when we did start up Global Seattle, we had someone there from UW, the University of Washington, and she called out that they have students there, and they've got a great entrepreneurship program where they're just looking for things to do. They're looking for reports to develop, and so current companies can also rely on universities for projects and things like that. My preference here would be to turn it over and have you comment and ask questions. If you'd like to do so, please shout, because we only have one microphone and it's up here. And then I'm going to attempt to relay the question so that it gets picked up by the microphone. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question.
So I'm an intellectual property attorney, and I do a lot of work with startups. And one of the challenges they have is when they initially start out, they can manufacture locally. But once they reach a certain level of volume, they're looking at for economies of scale, they have to manufacture abroad, whether it be China or Mexico. Is there any help, first of all, like a credible list? It's always a challenge when you start sending your intellectual property overseas, especially to China. That the government can provide any helpful advice as far as credible folks to work with, is always a challenge. And otherwise, if you had any just experience working with manufacturers abroad, any recommendations to consider?
So the question is around identifying credible manufacturing partners abroad as companies scale, and if there are any lists or resources to help with that.
Yeah, we have a lot of kind of product design and technology projects that launch on Kickstarter, and while we don't get heavily involved in helping them come to get to the point of actually releasing the product, we have people that we know in China, in Hong Kong, in that area, that we will provide recommendations to. We don't have a public resource for that. It's something that I think it's something that we want to share as much as possible. I would love to hear if anybody else knows of a good public resource.
Anyone in the audience?
Dragon Innovation. Yeah, Dragon.
You guys work with them.
Yeah, we work with them. I believe they're in Boston.
Could you repeat the name?
Dragon Innovation. They're a great US-based company that helps basically entrepreneurs take their product design or technology idea through all of the stages so that they can actually manufacture what they were hoping to create.
Anyone else have any ideas?
Well, I just wanted to, just a funny vignette, but I know an entrepreneur who, was in China for quite a while trying to work out a supply chain for her particular product. And as I understood it, she was even sleeping in factories at some point because she had some equipment that couldn't, or some plans or something that couldn't be moved easily, and didn't want them to be stolen, so didn't want to leave them until she finished her work. It's a problem that does need to be solved.
Absolutely. One, you should think twice about where you manufacture for that reason. Prue.
Hi, I just wanted to add a point about the resourcing, and you mentioned consulates. The British consulate helps companies companies to expand into the UK, but from the UK, there's an amazing network of consulate around the world, so whether it's China or India or wherever you want to go from there. And my colleagues at the UK Trading Desk are here. And there's also colleagues from Germany here as well, so any of your companies that want to, we work with Kickstarter in London as well, any of your, or these companies that want to expand into Europe, into the UK, and then onwards, we're free resources to help them.
And do you want to introduce yourself then, too?
Sorry, I'm Prolashby with London and Partners. I'm based at the British Consulate here in New York.
Did you want to? Other questions or thoughts?
I was just going to say that's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
My name is Christine, the founder of Betty, and we connect travelers to street markets. And my question is, I think for a lot of startups, it's kind of in this digital age easy to get exposure for products and export your product. But one of the hardest things that we've been experiencing is how to import products from around the world in a cost-effective way. Usually the profit margin to even import a product from a place in the Caribbean or parts of Africa is so high, there's no point in selling online. Do you have any resources or advice as to how to navigate basic import products from local markets as a startup company? Because obviously, the companies who do it, they're not startups.
So the question was around advice for importing products from foreign countries where the cost of importing may be high, like from the Caribbean, for example.
It's a very technical question, but just any advice on that?
Is it high because of tariffs or?
Multiple things. Tariffs, custom regulation once you get here. There's just like a list of different reasons that we've experienced in terms of importing products from Haiti, Ghana, and some of the coolest products that our consumers want in the U.S. are from these places.
Yep.
And because we can't compete with Amazon or Etsy, it's very hard to scale without that first barrier.
I'm not an expert in this specifically, but having global connected commerce companies like eBay can help with that. And I think that, so there are a lot of startups that are being launched right now that try to tackle this problem. For instance, we now accepted, this current batch has a Friends of eBay company called Videla Rapido, and they do the reverse, but their goal is to basically facilitate the movement of goods between the US and Latin America. And they serve as a financial and transportation ledger for the Latin American countries, because there's a big issue around trying to make sure that the funds will really be transferred for those products, and there are a lot of questions around even money laundering and how can we facilitate basically people sending products from the US or all over the world to Latin America instead of sending money. So there's a lot of work that is being done there, and I see a lot of startups that are opening up around that.
Anyone else? Yeah. So I would say on that too. I mean, there are two things. There are private sector resources, and eBay provides a number of different services that make it easier to transact both importing and exporting depending on where the product and the transaction is going. There's UPS, which has mail innovations, and FedEx as well. And we've got this advisor, a startup from Maryland, on our board who talks about, now this is an export story, not an import story, but she was filling out U.S. customs declarations by hand, dropping her product in a wheelbarrow and taking it over to the post office. And all of a sudden one day, one of her interns was Googling online and found this thing called UPS Mail Innovations, and all of a sudden she could do the paperwork with a click, and that saved a lot of time, and it made it viable for her to export. Now they do the same thing for bringing things into the country, but the other thing that I would say is that there are policy issues here at play, and when you're talking about tariffs or corruption in customs or lack of transparency or not knowing why your product is sitting at the dock for 3 weeks on end and you're unhappy. Those are issues that policymakers need to solve, and there are tools for doing that, but they're not short-term tools that are going to help you in the next day or two. There are these trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was just negotiated, where the aim of that is to lower those barriers for e-commerce and for digital trade and commerce generally. but that only affects the set of countries that are part of that agreement. So,
Just to piggyback off that, you know, I work for THL Express also, and we really specialize in export and import. So I know you use the FedEx to it also, but we really focus on the international market, so if anyone has any questions that they can answer, they can comment.
awesome. Yeah.
As we are talking about global markets, I want to ask about your experience vis-a-vis the language barrier in accessing new markets. Is English enough? Is that what you come across, or do you feel like you need to speak the language of the continents that you are accessing?
I can actually speak to that. So, my previous startup, Hack Labs, it was, as I said, a community platform for software engineers, and I can't answer your questions for every single country, but for me, it was a very interesting exploration process of understanding how each country works. For example, when we tried to launch in Israel, we realized that the Israeli tech community knows English very well and is at the same level of, I would say, the tech savviness. So the content that we were producing in the US was easily replicable there, but at the same time, it was a very closed community, so you actually had to have someone there to be an ambassador to your product in order to launch it. Whereas, for instance, in Russia, when we decided to go there, and I've had a lot of experience with it in the past, we realized that not only the language is a massive barrier, but also the level of growth of that specific market is not enough for us to be represented there. So it's always a case per case basis, but you have to deeply understand the barriers to entry to that market, and part of that is also looking at competitive landscape and looking at the startups. For example, when it comes to China, if you're a manufacturer and if you have not secured your IP and you're moving into China, then you might face some issues with your product being replicable, for instance. And what are the risks of that? And are you really growing a big competitor? Living in a country or talking, so what I did was talking to as many people from the community, like 100 people from the community in 3 weeks, and then figuring out what are the specifics of that community and if it's really worth it, if there is a product market fit or not.
I think in rough terms, the answer to your question breaks down along whether the business model is B2B in nature or B2C. For example, in the former category, we have a company called Lendable, based here in New York, that's arranging and structuring debt financing for companies that are extending credit in East Africa. The clients are companies, clearly, in East Africa that finance things like portable solar power systems or water filtration equipment, small vehicles. The management teams of those companies largely speak English, and so the management team of Lendable, they're I think mostly, if not entirely, English speakers. On the other hand, we have a company called DriveWealth that is international brokerage as a service. So they help consumers in emerging markets, right now it's China, India, and Latin America, invest in US securities. And so, from day one, they had the application and account creation interface in like 3 or 4 languages, like right out of the gate. And they have, most of their partnerships are with companies that have a lot of customers in China, and so they have a team of a customer support team in New Jersey that comes in at night and obviously speak Mandarin. So, and even actually we have a company in the US, in the New York market called B, that's mobile banking for financially underserved communities, and that they recently completed a Spanish language version of their app, because even in the States, that's helpful when you're going directly to the consumer.
Another thing, I guess I'd state something that's obvious, which is, if a product or service doesn't require localization because of the nature of what it is and the segment it's going after, that is very attractive. You know, if you can get to scale without localization, that's super duper attractive. So, you know, I think, you know, an example I'd give is like developer tools. You know, pretty typically developer tools, they're delivered over the cloud. It's an educated community of people who, even if their English isn't great, they'll like, you know, manage. And the documentation is important. How many sets of, you know, in an open source environment, you know, the users come to it kind of expecting to figure it out, you know. And yeah, if you can create a global business with no localization whatsoever, you know, that's a fantastic position to be in. But you know, so many businesses, if you're really going to reach scale, you can't skip out on the localization. It's getting cheaper to localize, but at some point you need the person on the ground. You need to really understand what's happening.
Sean, what about from any conversation?
The only thing I would add here is maybe to look at things on a city level, not just from a country perspective. For example, I was just in Germany last week, which is an important country for Kickstarter, and somewhere like Berlin that is extremely international. Most of the people I talked to there, I mean, 95% were speaking English versus like somewhere like Munich where it is much more localized. So I think just penetrating one more level to look at the city where maybe your market is one lens to consider.
Other questions or comments? So one of the things that we've started talking a little bit about just in this conversation have been pain points. You know, what are the pain points that you or your communities face as you go global? I mean, you mentioned a couple of them with respect to shipping and tariffs, but there are all sorts of others. There's IP protection, there's regulation, there's basic transparency issues for companies that just don't know, you know, how to figure out what a tariff line is or what to do if the classification changes over time. Could you call out one or two pain points that you see your communities face or that you've faced in the past as you're looking to go global?
I mean, how about infrastructure? You know, if it's expensive if you're a startup to get on a plane and go somewhere, you know, as far as you can go in a virtual, remote, you know, kind of way is awesome. And some countries are far better wired, you know, than others. So, you know, I think to me that's a super, you know, obvious barrier. And yeah, and some countries not only are better wired than others, but are investing completely differently. We've been seeing amazing companies coming out of South Korea because of a major commitment to the infrastructure there, right? And it's just not an even playing field.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest ones is actually like risk of entry and the product market fit. Like, what if you selected a country where you're not going to be successful, and the amount of time of the founder and the team on localization and marketing and product market fit and adopting the product and all that. I guess that's the biggest one.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I touched a little bit upon making sure that there's nothing lost in translation in terms of regulation. With the student lending example, or in the case of Circle, you know, they were at the forefront of creating the policy infrastructure to allow peer-to-peer payments over Bitcoin rails in the UK and elsewhere. I think also just getting connected to the right people, especially if you're going to be relying on partnerships locally. This brokerage company I mentioned, DriveWealth, is active in China, and they partner with a lot of Chinese securities firms to reach their customers. And you know, anytime you're doing something like that, you have to make sure that you're connected to the right decision maker, that the organization itself is aligned with your goals, that they're looking to drive real volume and not just kind of have like a shiny object. And you know, it helps to have investors who are local and who can make the right connections there.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of challenges around shipping, VAT, all these kind of, you know, day-to-day issues. But I think one of the ones that we also see is the risk of people losing sight of their vision and selling out, to be honest. this is something that we were just over in Berlin, and with Brexit, there's a lot of gravitational pull coming to Berlin, a lot of money coming there, and we honestly worry that startups, and whether they're just somebody trying to do a creative project or somebody that's trying to start a company, will lose sight of that initial vision of why they wanted to start the thing, because they will get pulled in different directions by investors, by people that want them to make a lot of money. In the case of Kickstarter, what we did to lock this in very early is we reincorporated last year to a public benefit corporation. It's a new legal designation where we basically pledge to have a positive impact on society, and we've written that into our legal charter, so it's not just profit maximization or a nonprofit. There's actually a choice in the middle these days where you can keep your mission and you're legally tied to follow that. So something that I would love to plug.
That advisor that I mentioned who's on our board has the same sort of
Cool.
So I have one last question, but I'm happy not to ask it if anyone else does.
Thank you. So I had business development at Foxy, we're an online English learning platform. And some of the challenges that I often find is when I try to sell to governments in other countries, they usually require to buy from a local company. So I often have to find someone who would buy my product, get a merchant, and then sell it to this company. Are there any recommendations or anything that you would find as common practices for the audience?
Right. Yeah,
I
please.
find it beneficiary because let's say local developed, because I just started my business, and because of this constraint I was able to enter the market and feel happy the first day I started launched on. If there's a way to stop this, it's quite a lot of startups because the big corporates will take over everything and then
Just in the UK, we've got something called the digital marketplace, which opens up the government IT contracts to small medium enterprise, so that it's not just the big corporates that are winning them, and it's open to companies from across the world. The only thing is, I'd say, to demonstrate commitment to the market, you would need to have a physical presence in the UK, in that market, to demonstrate that you can support the product and be there, and to that. It has opened up.
I guess one consideration I might suggest, I mean, Microsoft does a lot with resellers and sort of ecosystem. So there are a lot of people selling our stuff that aren't our people. And I guess if you're going to go through the effort of bringing on some sort of a distributor or reseller, hopefully, it can be one that is can scale your business rather than just be a friction point. So if it's just an access point to get the government contract, then that's clearly a big cost to the business. But if what it does is give you access to 10, not only the government, but this big company, that big company, then that has real business value for you. So I would just consider time that you spend in in selecting a distributor to see if they can bring you some scale effect. And hire a lawyer. Yeah, that's good. I think there are a few of them.